Nope, nope, nope. Okay, all right, we're good. All right. So let me go to officially start this.
Okay.
And I'm going to try to share my screen. So welcome to the third in the series of the Learn to Knit. This is our creating the texture, or I think it was billed as making a pattern with knits and purls. And I started at some point, I just started calling it texture because, you know, it's kind of is, as we're changing how our fabric looks and everything, just using our variation of knits and purls. So today you got your pattern, which is awesome. I'm going to be using the same basic setup as everything, which is the yarn that's like a bit of a bulky yarn, size 10 needles. You know, you can do whatever is right for you. And then we are going to, I'm going to try to share my screen to share a little bit of information about some patterns that you can kind of make with just knits and purls. And then we'll go into the actual pattern for the class. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
We're going to try this.
Okay.
All right. So I'm going to stop my video. So there's one last thing to look at here. I'm going to pause that. Okay. And then I'm going to go to my Zoom and we're going to try to share screen. Okay. Can you see the Learn to Knit series on your screen?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to try to go presentation mode, make it a little bit bigger. All right.
There we go.
Yay. So I'll share this after the class, but this is just a couple things that I wanted to call out that you could do with just knits and purls and make a pattern out of it, you know, because what we've been doing on the series so far is learning, you know, how to do your knit stitches, how to do your purls. And now we're going into what you can do with variations of those without really adding in whole new stitches. You know, we're not going too far into new techniques or anything. This is mostly just what can you do with them now that you have them in your arsenal. So one of the things you can do is like ribbing. This is on cuffs of sweaters and hats. Basically, it is a way to alternate the knits and purls in order to create some elasticity because it just changes the garment just by having that change between the like this is 2 by 2, so like 2 knits and then 2 purls on the right side. You could all of a sudden get something really stretchy, whereas before it was kind of flat, not too stretchy, just sort of like a dishcloth, you know, kind of firm, you know, so it's not going
Yeah.
to pull too much. But this, all of a sudden, you can put your, you know, head through something that it doesn't look like you could. So this is one way you can do knits and purls. And I've done a really pretty scarf before, just doing ribbing like up the whole thing, you know, making it, I think they called it a mock rib, but basically it was ribbing. It was kind of like a chunky yarn, so it was really big and fluffy. And I think it was knit 1, purl 1, or something like that. But you can do a lot of different kinds of ribbing. Even you can do ribbing that's really wide with your knit stitches, like say like, I don't know, even 10 knit stitches and then a couple purls, and you get a whole different look, something kind of 40s or 30s like with the sweaters. So you can do really
Oh.
wide pieces of their knitting plus just a little bit of purls in order to cause these stripes to go up and down. The more knits you put in there though, the less flexible it becomes, like elastic, because it
Okay.
just kind of ends up like more of like a style than a functional elasticity.
Got it.
Yeah, if that makes sense. So yeah, so when they're like 1 by 1, that could be like knit 1, purl 1, the 2 by 2, knit 2, purl 2, 3, knit 3, purl 1 kind of thing. You can go crazy with it depending on the style that looks best with the yarn and the needles you're using. And the way that this is when you're working flat is that you vary it, you kind of do the opposite of whatever you're doing on the right side, you kind of do the opposite on the wrong side in order to make the stitches pop out like they should. So on the right side, it's knit 2, purl 2, but on the wrong side, every time you have a knit, you're going to do purls on the back side, and vice versa. Anytime you have purls, you're going to do the knits on the back side.
Okay.
So this is one option. Another is patterns. And of course, you know, sky's the limit when it comes to patterns. People have been doing all sorts of this for a long time. You know, so there's basket, this one is kind of like a basket weave. There's motifs of like animals and, you know, nature scenes and leaves, and, you know, there's all sorts of things. So you could look it up, you know, in the pattern site of your choice, like Ravelry, or there's another one that's like Love Crafts or something that's new, or Etsy has patterns. And, you know, when you're looking for textured or something of that nature, this is when you would start getting these kind of looks.
Okay.
So on this one, it's got a border that's garter, right? You can see all those little ripples, but inside, that's where you get the main pattern, right? So in this one, it's kind of more of a 4-stitch pattern. And then to get it to be alternating, you go up as tall as the square you want, and then you kind of switch, right? So in this case, it would be, you start off with your purls and knits, and then on the next line up of the basket weaving, you start instead with knits, you know, so that's how you get your variation in the flat versus the bumpy parts.
Okay.
So this one is a free pattern. You know, I wanted to include it just to give credit to the creator and stuff, and they have a little bit of information on the full pattern, but it's an idea that's out there that you can do just by varying your knits and purls in sequence. You know, you can have this whole different kind of look than what we'd started off with either the garter or the stockinette. And then the next one I wanted to show is our last one, is another one on texture. So the pattern we're doing today is a little bit like this, but only in like diagonal lines. But this is the seed stitch. So you can see it's got a little bump, almost like a little X going on there. And these are basically knit 1, purl 1 over and over and over and over. And then when you're working the second side, it is the purl 1, knit 1. And so these are, it's a really, this one ends up being really thick fabric because it's kind of locked in more. I would feel like there's not much elasticity to this at all. I have a cowl that my friend made me, and it's very thick and warm. It definitely holds in the air, and pretty, super pretty. And so this is another example of just by alternating, you're starting to form a new pattern, even though it's the same kind of basic stitches we've been using. And this one also has a pattern attached that's got more information on exactly how to do it, and edging and things like that. So so I'm gonna share this after the class along with the video. And then if you find more things and you're like, wait, could I do this? Am I ready for this? You know, you just let me know, because we can always like email about it and be like, oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, you know, you got this. So those are a couple of examples of some stitches. Do you have any questions before we go on to the pattern? Looks good. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. And I'm going to put my video back on. Okay. All right. So I think we're ready to go ahead and start talking about today's pattern and answering some questions about how to do stuff with charts. So I'm going to turn over here, but you'll be able to see me with my other screen. And I'm going to be primarily over here on the Learn to Knit. So I'm going to pin myself so I can make sure that I'm still in the camera frame. Okay. So today we're going to be going into the pattern for the third class, the Create Texture using knits and purls. And we've got in here both a written pattern and a chart. So the first page really is basic information about, what are we doing, the kind of yarn I used, but you can use whatever is appropriate for the needles you have and the yarn you have on hand. Unless you want to exactly do this 5-inch square, then you'll have to worry about gauge, but otherwise we're really focusing on technique. The notes and abbreviations are pretty much the same. We're going to do cast on, knits, purls. We're going to have the right side of the work and the wrong side of the work because we're knitting flat, and stitches, turn work. So pretty basic like last time. So the written directions are going to be right here on page 3. And this time, what this pattern is going to do is the first 10 rows is about half of the square. And at that point, the pattern to get the second half is basically just repeating the first 10 rows one more time. So what happens is, because these keep moving over on the, as we went up the pattern, we get to a point where it kind of starts falling off and we start over here again. So magically, the way it worked was that you were able to just kind of repeat this one and go up to the top. And then you just cast off after that. So when the directions are like row 1 through 10, and then it's just repeat one more time, and then you can cast off. And so then that should give you this complete pattern. So one of the things that we talked about or I sent an email, was that it was a good time to start having maybe a Post-it or something to block out the papers, like on the directions, so you can just focus on one row at a time and know where you're at. I'm also a big fan of checking things off as I complete them. So like I have cast on, the 16 stitches. So I usually just say like I cast it on so that I'll know I did that piece. And I always mark up my patterns. And mostly they're available to me, through electronic forms to print again. But if nothing else, it lets me know where I was. And then if I screw something up and I have to go backwards or something, I'll just like cross it off. So I'm definitely somebody who says it's good, okay to mark up your patterns for sure, to know where you're at. So what you can do is, and I didn't grab a sticky note, but it's the same basic thing as like having something to block out the directions. So when I work with written directions, I block off pretty much everything except for the row that I actually need. So in this one, you can see that row 1's visible. So I would go ahead and work my way through that. So I'm thinking today we should work through the first 2 rows of the written directions. And then what we'll do is we will look at the chart and see how if we can do the next 2 rows following the chart. So we'll just try it out and see what happens. So okay. When you're ready, let's go ahead and cast on the 16 stitches to start. And you can use whatever method you would like.
Okay.
Were you able to watch the video that had the different cast-ons? You may not have had a chance yet.
I didn't, to be honest. I didn't have all the patterns printed, and I did that first because I have my folder now and I wanted to hold all the paper.
Yes,
and
that's important.
My next thing was to watch everything and then save it somewhere where it's accessible, because right now I just have it in the emails, and that's not accessible. I want it in another folder and I want links or something. So that's the next thing, and I just couldn't get there yet.
Oh, no worries. Do you want me to demonstrate that that cast on again with the where we go, we build it as we go, not the long tail one, but the one that we make onto the needles?
Oh, I didn't do that one.
I think it's the one we've been doing. Yeah. But
Oh,
oh, you,
okay.
yeah, I didn't know if you wanted me to demo that again or while we're, um, yeah, that one's probably the easiest one.
Okay. I'll because I think I did the long tail one to be
Oh, did you?
ready, but I'd like to practice something else.
Oh, okay. Well, let's see. So that was the long tail one is the one that we did like this, right? So you kind of grab enough yarn and you kind of like work it on with your hands. Is that the one you did? Oops.
Oh no, I did the one where you so I don't know what I'm talking about. I
That's
did the one where I we did it with a slip knot and then we did it like a knit stitch.
that one. Yes, yes, exactly. I'm not even really sure that it has a name, but it's kind of like you knit it onto the needle. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one. So let's do that one.
Okay.
We're just gonna build on that. So you make your little slip knot. Make sure you have a tail to weave in later. And then we go in. Make sure actually it's snug. Mine didn't want to snug up. I think my yarn's getting well used. Okay, there we go. All right, and then you go in as if to knit, but instead you just kind of pull it through and then twist it and put it back on the left-hand needle.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
like how predictably even it is.
Yes, yeah, I know, because you want that edge nice and neat. And that
Yeah.
way you're not guessing at how much yarn you use. I mean, I use a lot of the long tail cast on, but you have to guess that one because you have to estimate your yarn up front.
Oh
And
God, I'm bad at that.
yeah, depending on the project, I have often had to do it a few times, you know.
Okay.
And it is nice and steady. And we're here to relax and have fun, darn it. So
Yeah.
yeah, whatever feels right. 3, 4, 6. All right, pause to count. All right, I've got one more, I think.
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Oh, good. Yeah, I was nice and leisurely this time. I'm like, huh. Sometimes they go on fast. Sometimes they go on at their own pace is really what it is. All right. Okay. Okay. So I've got 16. You've got 16. I feel like my camera's having trouble focusing.
It's good.
It's good. It'll do. It'll do. It's live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a little washed out on the instructions, but since I have my own copy, that's not a problem.
Okay, good. I wonder if no, that's worse. Sometimes I remember there was like one light that I was able to turn on and it played a little bit better. That might not be too bad. Okay, it's a little darker. Okay, so okay, so what we're gonna do is this way. That's darker. Okay, so the first row is you purl the first stitch And so right from the get-go, we're going to purl one, and then we're going to follow the what's in the parentheses. So whatever's in the parentheses, you would repeat that if it tells you to. Repeating is generally indicated with the parentheses and then like the asterisk. So that's a common way you'll see things in patterns. If they want you to do something over and over again, the shortcut is there is knit 4 purl 1, and just keep repeating that knit 4 purl 1, knit 4 purl 1 until you get to the very end. And if the pattern's done well, it matches the number of stitches you've cast on, and there's no ambiguity there. So the first stitch you purl though, because that's outside of the parentheses. So we're going to purl 1, then we're going to bring our yarn between the 2 needles to the back, and then we're going to knit 4. Oops, mine are a little tight. 4. And then we're going to bring this yarn between the 2 needles to the front, and we're going to purl 1. All right, so that should be purl 1 on the very first one, knit 4, and then purl 1. And then you've done what it says for the starter piece, and then we're going to go ahead and repeat knit 4 purl 1. So I'm in the purl position of the yarn in the front, so I'm going to bring it between the 2 needles into the back, and I'm going to knit 4. And then bring the yarn between the 2 needles to the front and purl 1. Whoa. There we go. And then back between the 2 needles to the back and knit 4 and purl 1. And purl 1. Okay. So in this case, it worked out. Yay, I did my job. And if it doesn't, then that's usually when I'm like, wait, did I cast on the right number of stitches? You know, what happened here? I tend to be that knitter who always blames myself first. My friend Lori, right? She's always like, you know, she always takes to the Bravo, or you did look at the comments, like, what's wrong? What's wrong with this pattern? Where's the error? It's always a personality thing. Most of the time, she ends up finding a lot of, you know, things that I would have blamed myself for and been like, oh, I did all wrong. And she's like, no, look right here on this thing. Totally, everybody else has this problem.
I always think it's me too.
Yeah, yeah, right. Because I'm like, I must have done something wrong, but you know, I'll count my stitches first, and then I'll be like, okay, something's weird. So I can see that I've got little bumps every time I did a little purl in the front. So that's going to start forming these kind of patterns when we get done. So this was row 1. So we're going to go, so I can check it off. And we're going to go to row 2, which is the wrong side. This is the side that would not be outwardly facing if this was like a sweater, you know, so it's not really, it's a wrong side. It's just the other side. All right. So you'll notice on this time, what we're going to do is a purl 4, knit 1. And this is also to kind of move that pattern along. So it's not completely opposite, like we were talking about with the ribbing, where everything was completely opposite, but it's pretty close, you know. So, but because we're slanting ours upward, we're going to be a little off center of the repeat pattern. That's going to move it along, versus like if it was a ribbing, you would stack them on top of each other like a line, right? So, for example, if I wanted absolutely everything to be completely on top of each other, linear up and down, I would look at what my first line was and I do the opposite there. So if I ended on a purl, I would like knit one behind it, you know, to opposite it. And then I would purl four, going backwards, and then knit one and then purl four. So I would do it completely matching if I wanted it to be up and down. But because we're slanting, we're moving, the stitch count goes over to like by one a little bit. So we'll see once we start keeping going with it. But like, for example, this stock photo that I used of like ribbing, that one you
Yeah.
would always have to match the opposite stitch on the backside, you know, so it would be very regimented, whereas this one's, you know, kind of slanting. All right. So we're gonna do purl four. And then I'm going to knit one and I'm going to bring my yarn between the two needles to the back. And I'm going to knit one. And then between the two needles to the front. Between the two needles to the back to knit one. And then to the front again, purl four. And then knit one. Okay. And then it says repeat until one stitch remains. And I've got one stitch and that one is going to be a purl. Okay. So if I turn it over, because you'll mostly see it on the front right side of the work, I'll start seeing my my little purls here and there, kind of stacking on top, like going over a little bit. It'll start being more clear once you get to row 10. Obviously, that's when you've done the full cycle. And then like row 3, row 3 is a little bit more spread out. So you would knit 2, then purl 1, and then you go into the repeat. Because there's only enough room across the canvas of the stitches to do it the repeat twice. Then we go into knit 3. So this is where you start, you know, seeing how it gets broken up, right? You put in a repeat as often as you can to save room. But and then you kind of write out the stitches on either side of the line. But you know, when you can and there's a repeat, a designer will usually throw that in there for you. So that's how you would read that. So like row 3, you would knit 2, then purl 1, and then you knit 4, purl 1 twice, 2 times, and then in sequence. So you'd knit 4, purl 1, knit 4, purl 1, and then you'd knit the last 3. And then the next one, row 4, it's kind of similar. You're purling 2, knitting 1, then you have a repeat twice of purl 4, knit 1, then purl 4, knit 1, and then purl 3. So the written directions are going to break it down to exactly what you need to do for every stitch that's on your needles. I've always preferred written because you can take it kind of one at a time, and you're only paying attention to words. But I thought at this point, this might be a good time to look at the charts and see how that pertains to like style, like which one you like better, if it's written or if it's the chart you like better. So we've done the first 2 rows using the written. Let's take a look at that, how that looks on the chart. So on this next page, on page 4, there's a chart for this pattern that's already filled out. And what I was going to say, I threw in an extra blank chart for use if you wanted to play around with like some of the things that I was showing earlier, and also make up your own design. Like maybe you want to do something that's, what is that, Morse code or something like that. or somebody's initial, and so you can kind of stack the symbols to make a shape or letters or something like that. What we want to think of is that this essentially matches, your whole piece of fabric that you're going to make here. And so when you make your dots, in this case, the dots are on the right side, they are pearls. On the wrong side, they're knits. So this one has a key. So you want to keep that in mind when you're designing. But like if you wanted this to be maybe the first 3 rows were all textured, you could just fill in these 3 rows, and you go to like the next 3, maybe there'd be no dots. You would just be doing knits on one side, pearls on the rest to make like a stockinette stitch. And then you could like switch up a couple things, but basically every row you're doing something here builds up the pattern. So if you skip a row, you'll probably have like a blank, just like a normal stockinette row between things. So you can keep that in mind as you design. So if I was going to do like, a letter, like, I don't know, like I or something like that, you could do dots or something. And you would have like this big I. You could have that repeating over and over and over again, but you maybe put some distance between the when you would do it in the chart. So maybe you would just make sure you had like a space between them. So, and then it's almost like a ladder really, but like you could just build up as you went. And so if you were going to do it from the chart, you would be like, on this row, I'm only going to do knits. On row 2, I'm only going to do pearls. But on row 3, I'm going to knit 2, as I'm going this direction. I'm going to knit 2, then I'm going to purl 1, then I'm going to knit almost all the way across, but I'm going to purl 1 and knit 2. And then on row 4, I'm going to purl 2, and then the rest of these are all knits, and then until you finish with the last couple. So that's kind of the way the chart would work, rather than when you're doing the written instructions, it'll tell you in words all the ones to do. But when you do the chart, you're reading it by squares. So this is a little bit more like the counted cross stitch, right? So when I said that we might need markers, I was going to show like you could do this a variety of ways to make this make sense to what your chart reading needs are. You can cover up the chart when you're working on it so that you're only looking at the active row. So like say row 1, and I would use a piece of paper to cover all the rest of it. See if I have yes, I have a little something I could do so that you're like only looking here. I read this great book about how to read charts and get the most out of them. And they were basically like, only focus on the present and the past. You may want to care about the past, but don't worry about the future because you're not there yet. And having looked at a lot of charts in time, that makes a lot of really good practical sense. Because sometimes you look at the charts and you're like, this is so scary, and I don't know how any of this is going to work with what I'm currently doing. And it's because it's too far ahead. You're looking like, you know, up here 10 rows ahead at the really tricky part or something, or the part that doesn't make sense, and you're so far away from it. It's easier to just wait and until you get there. So it was the general advice was like, maybe just focus on what you're doing at any moment. And there's lots of people who use rulers or like these big magnets. I've seen big magnets that people kind of put over as like a strip, so it hides, you know, big thick black pieces that only hide, you know, everything except for what you're working on, to be really intentional. So when you have the markers, sometimes it's helpful to be like, mark up all the stitches you care about, you know, in terms of like, I'm going to have to do something special there. So it could be, I only color in these dots so that I know when I get to these particular stitches on my needles, I'm only really going to care about this one. So earlier we were talking about counting, right? And so in this case, you could do, I guess, put this on my color key, make sure it's like this, these are blues. I only want to pay attention to the fact that I'm going to purl on a right side row and knit on a wrong side row. Otherwise in my head, I'm going to know like this direction I'm going to knit, this direction I'm going to purl. So when we're talking about counting, we could be like 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4, 1. And that would be a way to do it, just reading the chart alone. And also, because there's this note saying that basically rows 1 through 10 are repeated in rows 11 through 20. On some patterns, they'll do like a big thick border around that. So you really almost might even see just rows 1 through 10, and then it would say repeat or something in the directions. So when you see that in patterns, sometimes it's like this, where you have a big thick border around the repeat area. You see a little lace in like a sock where they only want you to repeat a certain section. That seed stitch and the basket weaving one that we were showing in the PowerPoint file, that is another example of like, it's a short set of instructions to repeat the what you actually have to do. And so you might see just a tiny little, maybe 4 or 5 boxes inside this border, and they're like, go forth and just do that little tiny graph over and over and over again for as many stitches as you have on your needles, because it's adaptable. You can repeat it as many times as your stitch count will allow, and then you do something at the edges to join it all together. Is a lot of what you'll see, but the really, really simple patterns. So in this case, if I wanted to, I could mark up all of my special instruction stitches, basically. These are the ones that are going to deviate from normal, just stockinette stitch, basically, is what we're doing here. And so I can color it all in. And then this is also going to show me my final result of what I could be expecting to look at. Now, if this was lace and these were yarn overs, or if they were something else that we were doing, like increases or something like that, at every point on this pattern, I would know that some special thing is happening with all these blues. And in this case, it's just going to be the fact that you're going to see a bump on the front, basically, with the purl, doing the opposite, purling on the front and knitting on the back. It's going to create a little ridge here, and on the wrong side, it'll be a furrow, like in a field. So I can look at the chart and basically think, okay, I can just read this and go line by line and come up with the same pattern, the same knitted piece of material that I would if I was actually reading all the directions for the written page. So it really is preference on what works best for you. Some people really love the charts because it kind of takes the clutter out of it. You don't have to worry that you misread knits or purls or anything like that when you're just looking at the boxes. As long as you know your key, you can just go for it. And then every time you cross this row off, like we did row 1, and you could do row 2 that we've already done, and then you can kind of just reveal it and work your way up. So every time you finish something, you just kind of keep moving it up until you're done. So that's chart reading. What do you think? Do you like written or do you like charts better? And if you're on mute, I can unmute you. Well, I think we'll go back to the, we'll try to do row 3 on the chart. How about that? Okay, so I've done rows 1 and 2. So row 3 is read from the right to left. So we start on the right and we work our way over to the left. And what I'm going to do here is anytime it's a blank, I'm going to knit on this line. So if it's blank, I'm going to knit, and when there's a dot, I'm going to purl. So I'm going to knit 2, purl 1, purl 1. All right, so knit 2, purl 1, then I'm going to knit 4 and then purl 1. So knit 4, and purl 1. Oops, I just slid that one. Sorry, that's left over. I've been doing a lot of brioche. So I'm going to purl 1, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to knit 4. And then purl 1. Okay. And then I'm left with 3 stitches, which matches to what I've done here. And so those last 3 stitches I'm going to knit. But I'm going to bring my yarn to get in position to the back, and then knit 3. Okay. So that's my row 3. And I'm starting to see my bumps, kind of line up here. And I'm going to say that I completed this row. And then we're going to try to do row 4 using the chart, and then we'll check in. And feel free to come off mute if you have any questions. Okay, so in this one, we're reading from this direction. We're reading from left to right. And so we're going to purl 2 because we're on a wrong side row. And purl on wrong side rows. So we're going to purl 2, then knit 1 to start off with. And then knit 1. And then bring the yarn to the front again. Okay, so then I'm going to purl 4, knit 1, purl 4, knit 1, and then I should end up with 3 stitches at the end. So purl 4, knit 1, then purl 4, Whoops. Try that again. Row 4, knit 1. Okay. Then I have 3 stitches, and I should have 3 stitches here. So we are going to have 3 more purls. Okay. All right, so we've done row 4 now. And we're starting to see this getting going here. It's a little harder to see it on the pink, but it's happening. I see my little purls bumps here, and the rest of them are like stockinette stitch. You can see that with like the little V's. And it's there's another one. Whoa, let's see here. Did I lose ya? Oh, I can hear you now. Did I lose ya?
Yeah, my internet, I had to get on my phone. So
Oh, internet.
Yeah, computer's bad. So keep going.
Okay, don't worry about it. You'll have the recording for sure. So we will, so what I had done is I had used the chart for the next 2 rows.
Okay.
And then just to see if that was different for anybody, and then highlighted it and everything like that. So I know we're in the last little bit of things. Would you like me to go over anything you might have been curious about?
No, I'm following along really well. So please
Yeah.
just keep going. I want you to cover all your points.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to, I'm going to say, go back to the written part. And we're going to talk about, okay. So it did end up matching pretty much like line for squares per square of what I had looked at the chart, right? So it was like knit 2, purl 1, and then you do these twice and then knit 3. So it's almost in this particular one, it's almost like what works best for you, right? And sometimes you can switch between the two. You can go back and forth between I liked the written until I got to this one point, and then I really wanted to just look at it, right? I have this pattern. I was looking through some of my old, my current projects, and I was going to pull out a couple of things that pattern wise, see if I had some printed. So I've got this one. This is the scarf that is like so long it will never die. This one, which I do love. It's really pretty, but it is now about 6 feet tall. It's crazy. It's going to be beautiful, but it is, and I will say it is page after page of written directions, right? And if you were the kind of person who liked charts, we probably could have, there probably could have been some shortcuts with the charts. Just because you're kind of repeating section after section. So like this one had section 1 and section 2, but basically what you were really doing is changing colors. So there were just a lot of extra instructions, even though really it was just color changes that we were doing. So I think I'm on what, 5. It's so long, but but it is also an interesting one for the texture. So I was going to pull it out so you could see in person.
Oh,
so
wow.
This is a little bit of color work, and there's nothing too special about it in terms of difficulty, but like here's one section was like stripes, right? And these were just alternating colors. So it was kind of like knit 2 rows in all knits, so the garter stitch in one color, and then you would change them at the edges and switch colors and kind of jog it up, which is like you kind of switch your colors by winding them up the sides. And
Okay.
then so like that was one direction. Then this next one was slip. So this is another type of texture. And what this is doing is kind of, you slip one without knitting it. And that kind of creates a little bit of a color difference. So it makes it almost
Okay.
looks like a little crosses. But
Yeah.
yeah, so you're kind of just slipping one without knitting it, and then you like knit the next one, I think, in the color. And then on your second way back over, you kind of I think you knit across all of them in the back. So then
Okay.
that anything you didn't initially do, you just slipped it, gets caught up, and so it brings all the rows up even. So this is another way to play with texture and just switching things up between knits and purls. We're sort of like slipping knit wise, you know, kind of thing. It
Okay.
counts. So this is another kind of, you know, there's no need to look too far. There's tons of patterns out there, right, that can do all
Yeah.
these beautiful things. But like I said, this one was extensive in terms of actual printed stuff. And then this is my Queen's Gambit. So next week is color work, and or not next week, sorry, the next class, which is in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And this one shows it's a graph, but it's just for color. So you're not doing special stitches, you're just doing color changes.
Okay.
And in this case, she did this chocolate, sorry. They did,
Just
she
like my
had
stuff.
different, right? She had different different types of patterns. So three different charts. And I was kind of keeping track of my sequences here, but here's like where I was using the Post-it to only worry about what I'm doing from the bottom up to the top, because which was helpful. I read all those tips when I was doing this, because it is kind of complicated. I'm going to bring it into sight.
Oh my goodness.
And it's
It
a
looks
little
like
puckered.
houndstooth. It looks like
Yeah.
houndstooth.
So it
It's
ends up being
cool.
houndstooth. And here's where where it is, right? So like I'm
Yeah.
starting on this. Yeah. And then this yellow is my yellow, or the clear is my yellow, I think is how we're doing it. So I've got like a little bit of things that kind of match up to here so far.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is helpful. Like here's a way to interpret the color. The littlest one, I think, was this one. And it's like a 2x2. And so when it's blocked out, it's going to look a little bit more like square checkers.
Yeah. Oh, cute.
Right now it's
That's
a little puckered.
really stunning. Oh
And
my goodness.
so eventually that's going to look like this. It's going to be a cowl that's kind of folded up on itself, and it's going to have the checker stuff on the inside, you know.
Oh my gosh.
It can be
Darling.
wild. Yeah, it's not a simple one, but it's easy
No.
to do. It's just time consuming, right? And it reminded me of your hat, because I was like,
Yeah.
color? I'm working on
Holy
something.
cow. Yeah.
So there are a couple of instances of charts there versus written directions. And she did have written directions for the color work, but I found that, especially with color work, it's much easier to do it with a chart, because
Right.
it translates really well, right? You're doing, yeah, it's like 1 for 1. This block of color represents what you're actually putting on your needles. Whereas when it comes to things like this, it's really a hit or miss on what works best for you, is this or that. But so say like I put these marks in here. Let's say I wanted to know what that's going to look like. Like I got, I think we talked about this before. It's like maybe I bought a vintage pattern and I have no idea what this is going to look like. So if I color it in, all of a sudden I'm going to be like, oh, okay. It's going to start leaping off the page at me of like, this is what it should look like.
Right.
And this sometimes takes the guesswork out of it. And there's a lot of different there's a lot of different graphs out there, a lot of different people who use different symbols for everything. Sometimes the
Yeah.
keys are extremely complicated. The one I'm doing with Brioche right now, I was like, nope, nope. Like,
Oh, wow.
I don't want to know how this translates. So a lot of times I'll just stick with what's comfortable. And I think that's important that they make both, right? So in a pattern. Yeah. But yeah, so there's the ability to make your own design. There's so many books out there that's got stitches, there's patterns already. But I hope that's kind of an insight into what you can do with just the knits and purls that you already know how to do, and just how to kind of like vary them. Yeah.
Yeah. I really liked that you showed us both things on this for this class.
Oh, thank you.
Because I really, because I'm a beginner, or maybe it's just how my brain works and it'll always be this way. I really enjoyed on row 4, purl 2, knit 1, purl 4, knit 1. And then I could just look at that with the masking that you did with the sticky notes. I'm like, okay, now I know where I'm at. And
Right.
then I enjoyed the chart because that gives me the aerial view, right? Here's what this thing's going to look like when it gets done.
Right.
And here's the pattern emerging. So I can hold up my work when I get a few rows in and go, okay, yep, that looks like that.
Yeah, that's important too, because you really want to know where you're at, right? You know, your roadmap.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. And
yeah.
I hope this made it, you know, fun and like opened up, like when you're ready or when you're interested and you find that pattern, you're like, oh, that looks interesting. Yeah, I could do that. You absolutely can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you know, I was hesitant to take more because my brain just needs to do one thing until it feels comfortable. But this actually was super important to take with the first 2, just because it gives you context.
That's good to know. Yeah, excellent. I will. I'll keep that in mind too. I think that some of the layout of the other classes work a little bit like that too, right? Where you're.
Okay.
Well, I was thinking about we were talking about the shaping one, right? And and how that will start making sense. That plus the lace beginner lace will probably go well together.
Okay.
Yeah, but not like you have to have it. I mean, certainly not. But I feel like there are certain ones that it's meant to build, right?
Right.
Yeah, but I think the next one up is the color, and then and that's really just kind of talking about how to add, you know, it's a little bit interpretation, kind of like we were just doing, you know, it's like, how do you look at this and translate in your mind, like, okay, well, last time the chart was talking about different knit stitches, right? Like I would have to translate it to stitching, whereas like with color in general, it's you stick with stockinette or something, like one kind of stitch. You're either doing stockinette or garter, but you add the color work in, say, like stripes, like we were looking at. And so instead on the chart of interpreting it as a different stitch, it's different color, right? So
so that's the build there. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
still a chart, but just different. This time the key will be like, okay, now you should use this color versus this color. And I think we've got in the pattern using one color at a time, but incorporating color like in stripes. And then I think by the end of the swatch, it's got color, 2 colors on a row, and floats. And floats are not, you know, floats are that's why they're in the inside of a sweater, right? They're the stuff that you catch. It's like where the stuff goes behind the scenes and goes, you know, so it looks pretty on the front, but in the back it's like a big long line. There are ways to get around that, but I think I tried to keep the floats really short so that it was not too bad. I'm gonna see if I can find my little swatch for it.
So is that the same as traveling the yarn? I've heard that term.
Yeah, I could think that sounds right. It does sound right.
Like when you're working with 2 colors and you're working with the one color, but you need the other one accessible, so you travel it up, whatever.
Yeah, so carrying as well. Oh, let me make sure I'm on the right camera. Okay, here we go. So this is the backside with like the floats that come of this. There are ways to lock these in if they get too out of hand. You're not supposed to carry more than like, I don't know, 4 or 5 stitches is probably like the max if you want to start carrying. When you get into 6, there's this trick to kind of and I'm not going to show that in the class, but I can provide a YouTube link. But
Okay.
it's kind of like you wind it in, it gets caught, and I think
Yeah.
it's by like twisting the yarn, yeah, so that you're not like the super long float. But for
Yeah.
this class, pretty much what we're going to do is start with stripes, and then we're going to move on to alternating colors. So like on
Okay.
this, yeah, so it's like where you'll start carrying, and these are longer, well, I should say shorter floats, because you're carrying and then it's just one stitch that you're skipping, kind of thing. And when we get
Okay.
up here, it's like maybe every other stitch. So it ends up being the goal is to not be too tense with the yarn you carry in your back. As when I
My problem.
when I
My
stretch this
problem.
out,
Yeah.
this down here is nice and stretchy, but up here where there's all the floats, it's like or you know, it doesn't go too far.
Okay. What?
I'm a tight knitter when it comes to knitting.
Oh God,
All that
yes.
stuff.
What's the weight of that yarn that you're going to use for that class?
This one is, it's technically chunky, but like I said, you pretty much, you can use any, it's written, the exact yarn is here in the pattern, and it's called Chunky Weight Cascade Yarns. It's called Anthem. This one's acrylic. It was just easy to work with over and over and over again, you know, but you can use anything you have. So if you've got something on hand that you have 2 colors of, otherwise you go get something like from a craft store, I'd say, for experimenting. Like, you know, you don't need too much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got
But
it.
it always helps if it's the same size
Yeah.
type of yarn. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, thank you so much for attending this class, and I'm
Yes.
glad that it was working for you and giving you some good context to have. And if I don't see you, and that's okay, I will see you for the next one, which I believe is the shaping one, right? The adding, increasing, and decreasing. That one's gonna be fun. I like that one.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good, Megan.
All right. Have a great evening.
You too. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.